I woke up to the sound of wood cracking like bone. For half a second I thought it was a tree branch, maybe a storm, maybe a raccoon with a death wish. But then came the smoke, thick, bitter, and wrong. I didn't bother grabbing shoes, just bolted out the front door and froze. My boat was on fire, and not tipped over, not vandalized, burning. Flames curled up the sides like it was being sacrificed. The old cedar hull, sealed and resealed with my granddad's marine varnish, was hissing and splitting down the middle. One of the oars snapped in two and launched into the lake like it was trying to escape. I couldn't move. Not right away. I'd patched that boat with my own hands. My grandfather taught me to sand and seal her in the heat of Georgia summers before the HOA ever crept this far south with its signs and spreadsheets and smug little rules. She wasn't fast, she wasn't pretty, but she was ours. And now she was nothing but cinders on the water. I looked around, just trees and silence. The shadows were already empty. Whoever did it was long gone, probably halfway home to their spotless garage and perfectly trimmed HOA-approved grass, telling themselves this was just community enforcement. I stood there until the last of the fire hissed out and the lake swallowed the smoke. Then I said it. Not loud, not angry, just final. Okay, y'all want a war? You got one. The thing about inherited property is people who didn't earn it tend to underestimate how deep it runs in you. They think because you didn't pay a mortgage, you don't bleed for the land. They think you can be pushed, fined, regulated into submission, because that's how the system works for them. But this house, this land, that boat, it's not just real estate. My grandfather, Reggie Brooks, built this place with his brothers after coming back from Vietnam. He laid every brick by hand, fought tooth and nail to get the land zoned independent when the first wave of planned communities started cropping up around the lake in the late 80s. He negotiated a separate shoreline clause with the county clerk himself in '91, made sure our lot would keep lake access no matter what got built around us. His motto, don't let him draw lines through what you bled to earn. I was 12 when he first let me steer the boat alone, damn near rammed it into the cattails, but I remember him laughing so hard he nearly dropped his tackle box. Every corner of this property has a memory like that. It's not fancy, just trees, a quiet dock, and the old porch swing he hung back when my grandma still read mystery novels out loud in the evenings. After he passed, everyone told me to sell, said the taxes were going to kill me, said the HOA would never leave me alone if I didn't integrate. But I stayed, because this is where I still hear his voice, still smell his pipe tobacco in the shed, and because he gave me the tools to fight. Not just the legal paperwork, which I've got in 3 places scanned and notarized, but the mindset. Don't start nothing, but if they do, end it. I didn't know who exactly lit the match that night, but I had a good idea, and I already knew where this was going. This wasn't about a boat, this was about control. And I don't do leash and collar living, not now, not ever. The first shot wasn't loud. In fact, it came tucked inside a manila envelope that looked almost polite, like an apology from a dentist's office. I found it wedged in my front gate one morning, sealed with one of those self-important HOA wax stamps, deep burgundy like they were declaring war in medieval France. Inside, a letter from the Ashgrove Landing Homeowners Association formally notifying me that my use of the lake violated the current terms of community water access policy as revised January 1st of this year. Translation, I was fishing off my own shoreline without kissing the ring. It went on to say I was encouraged to join the Ashgrove Landing Fishing Club, which sounded less like a recreational group and more like a racket, a friendly extortion disguised as a membership benefit. Annual dues, $600. Penalty for unauthorized lake use, $50 per occurrence. I reread it twice just to confirm the idiocy. Then I walked out to the lake, planted a folding chair in the same spot I'd fished with my granddad since I was 10, and spent the next 2 hours pulling bass out of the water while drinking the coldest, cheapest beer I could find. And I wasn't about to pay $600 to access what was already mine. That night, I found my trash bin knocked over and dragged halfway into the woods. Could have been a raccoon, sure, but the beer cans were flattened, every single one, like someone had gone out of their way to step on them, like someone was making a point. I didn't report it, I just made a note. The next week, it escalated. I came outside to find a bright orange sticker slapped across the front of my mailbox, unapproved structure subject to removal. Mailbox, a mailbox, the same one my grandfather installed in 1994 with a post sunk in concrete back before HOAs were even within spitting distance of our lot. Apparently now it was an unregulated fixture visible from community roads. I peeled it off and tossed it in the fire pit. Then came the courtesy calls. 3 different HOA reps came by in the span of 5 days, always with that practiced smile that said they'd rather chew nails than talk to me but were legally obligated to pretend otherwise. The first one called my boat dock an eyesore. The second asked if I'd considered updating the color of my siding to better reflect the neighborhood aesthetic. The third didn't even bother to fake it, just looked me dead in the eye and said, "You're not setting a great tone for the area, Mr. Brooks." I told him I wasn't trying to set any tone, just trying to live in peace. He left a flyer for the next HOA meeting anyway. Bold letters across the top. Ash Grove Landing, Unity through order. Order, sure. The president of the HOA didn't show up himself, not yet. He was still pretending to be above it all. But I knew Clive Brenner's fingerprints when I saw them. He was the type to play chess 3 moves ahead, especially when he thought the other guy hadn't even found the board yet. He knew exactly what he was doing. This wasn't about rules. It was a message, one that started with fines and passive-aggressive lawn visits, and as I was about to find out, was only just getting started. They always start with paperwork, letters, fines, smiles dipped in threat. But when that doesn't work, they get creative. The first real hit came a week after the mailbox stunt. I was working from home, tuning out a firewall audit on a client's cloud system when my phone buzzed. Motion alert. Not a camera? I don't believe in putting my business online like that. Just an old-school sensor rig I built myself. Pressure, vibration, simple tech. Something crossed the front fence line. I looked outside. Nothing. But an hour later, I found my truck keys missing. Not gone from the house. Gone from the ignition. Now I know what you're thinking. You left your keys in the truck? Yeah, I live in the woods, nearest neighbors 40 yards away and scared of squirrels. I don't lock my door to pee, but I sure as hell don't misplace my keys. They turned up 3 days later, duct taped to my front door with a note that read, "We recommend you secure your property for your own safety." No HOA letterhead, no name. Just printed text, like a ransom note without the charm. I didn't respond. I didn't blink. I just drove into town and bought a fresh set of trail cameras. Not digital, analog, local memory, no Wi-Fi, no breach. They wouldn't see it coming. But they weren't done. Next, they started hosting community events on the stretch of shoreline closest to my property. Family barbecues with half a dozen coolers and kids peeing in the water. Fishing club socials where guys set up folding chairs just a few feet from my dock, casting lines like they owned the whole damn lake. One of them even nailed a rod holder into one of my trees. I walked out, pulled it clean off the bark, and dropped it at the guy's feet. He smiled. "Didn't realize this was private property," he said, knowing damn well it was. The next morning, someone dumped a full sack of crawfish shells on my porch. No note this time, just the stench of beer and spite. I kept my cool, for the most part, but the fuse was getting shorter. Then came the real damage. Sunday morning, early, I stepped outside with coffee and nearly tripped over my garden bench. Except it wasn't where I left it. It was upside down, one leg cracked clean off, soil everywhere, and my grandfather's tackle box, which had sat under that bench for 20 years, was missing. I found it floating in the lake 2 hours later. Open. Half the gear gone. The rest rusted through. That box had his initials carved in the lid. RB 1981. I didn't cry, I didn't rage. I just sat there in the wet grass, holding the lid in my hands like a folded flag. That was the line. You can mess with my siding? You can find me over a mailbox? You can send your little volunteers to tell me I'm an eyesore. But the minute you touch something sacred, something that doesn't belong in your rulebook or your budget meetings, that's when it stops being a nuisance and starts being a war. And the man behind all of it? He finally made his appearance. He came down the hill like he owned the slope. White linen shirt, loafers with no socks, clipboard in hand like it gave him divine authority. Clive Brenner, the man who looked at property lines the way a colonizer looked at maps, just suggestions drawn in pencil. He smiled like we were old friends, said something about ongoing compliance concerns, asked if I'd reconsider joining the community in a formal capacity, said I seemed like the type of guy who appreciates structure. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. He looked past me to the lake and nodded at where the bench used to be. Things get messy when folks try to live outside the boundaries. You understand that, right? I closed the door on him mid-sentence. Inside, I picked up the half-melted lid of my grandfather's tackle box off the table. They weren't just trying to control me, they were trying to erase something they couldn't comprehend. Family, history, respect. That's when I knew. Peace wasn't coming. And I was done playing defense. Contrary to popular HOA belief, I wasn't raised to solve problems with fists or flames. My granddad had a saying, one of many, always try the front door before you kick it in. So I did. First thing Monday morning, I took a deep breath, sat down at my desk, and pulled up the deed. I already knew what it said. I could have recited it from memory, but I printed it anyway. 3 crisp copies, highlighter lines under the shoreline access clause. I even stapled a county map with the zoning boundaries clearly marked. My parcel, my dock, my shore. Then I walked it up to the HOA office, one of those fake colonial buildings they used to justify dues. Inside smelled like lemon wipes and cheap authority. Receptionist barely looked up. I asked for Clive. She said he was in a meeting. I said I'd wait. An hour later, she came back with a smile so tight it could have cut steel. He's asked me to tell you any concerns regarding compliance must be submitted through the online portal. I handed her the folder. This isn't a concern. It's a legal record. She took it like it might bite her. I left before I said something I'd regret. The next day, I got an email. No signature, no greeting. Just a block of text stating that documentation provided does not supersede current HOA guidelines, and that non-members may not assert legacy usage rights in conflict with community standards. Legacy usage rights? Like I was squatting in history? I replied, attaching the notarized shoreline access agreement, the survey, and the title. I CC'd the county zoning office for good measure. 3 days later, I got a voicemail from a guy named Todd, HOA legal liaison, which I'm pretty sure means guy Clive hired from his CrossFit group. Todd said he appreciated my thoroughness, but insisted that HOA policy had been updated by majority vote and that communal resource management requires cohesion. I called him back. I'm not in your HOA. Silence. Exactly, he said. Which is the problem? I wasn't just being stonewalled, I was being gaslit. They were rewriting the rules mid-game and telling me I just hadn't read the fine print, acting like the lake was a neighborhood pool and I was the kid who snuck in without a wristband. So I filed a formal complaint with the county, attached all the same documents, explained the escalation, the property damage, the harassment. I even flagged the fishing club's public use events where members had been driving nails into my trees and leaving trash on my land. A week later, the county clerk's office called. The woman on the line, Debbie, soft voice, sounded like she crocheted flags in her spare time, told me, "We're seeing a lot of confusion with that HOA. You're not the first to raise concerns." That was something, not much, but enough to keep going, until I got the envelope. Thick paper, gold ink, delivered by hand. Inside, a community mediation request from the Ash Grove Landing Board of Directors. The letter said I was being invited to participate in a conflict resolution process, that I could present my perspective at a closed-door meeting. No audio, no transcripts, no legal counsel allowed. I didn't respond. 2 days later, a motion passed at the HOA meeting, without me, of course, declaring all shoreline access points restricted to dues-paying members and approved guests. They posted new signs overnight. One of them went up on my dock rail. I tore it down, tossed it in the fire pit next to the first sticker. And that's when Hazel walked into my house and said, "I think it's time I told you something." She was holding a tablet, old, dusty, the kind Clive used to keep locked in his study when they were married. "I didn't want to get involved," she said, "but after what they did to your boat and the tackle box, you deserve to know what this really is." I looked at her, then at the screen. And for the first time since this whole mess started, I didn't feel cornered. I felt ready. The tablet looked harmless, just a scratched-up old Samsung, the kind you'd find under a couch in a divorcee's Airbnb, but Hazel handed it to me like it was radioactive. "This is his," she said. Well, was his. He used to keep all the HOA stuff on here, never thought I'd need it, until now. I powered it on. She'd already cracked the passcode. Clive's birthday, naturally. Narcissists are predictable like that. What I found wasn't just incriminating, it was a goddamn goldmine. There were folders, neatly labeled, color-coded, date-stamped like some kind of petty tyrant's treasure chest. Vendor bids 2021. Fishing club ops. Community infra budget. And one simply titled Darnell. That one hit different. But I started at the top. The vendor bids folder wasn't bids at all. It was invoices, dozens of them, from companies that didn't exist. Landscaping services charging 10 grand for shoreline beautification that never happened. Maintenance crews billing for hours, on days it rained like hell. One file had a PDF from LakeSafe Consulting billing the HOA $14,500 for compliance enforcement assessments. I Googled it, no such company. The EIN number traced back to a P.O. box in a strip mall Clive used to lease. He was funneling HOA dues into shell companies, money laundering plain and simple. In fishing club ops, it got uglier. There were lists of members, spreadsheets of cash transactions, and a long email chain between Clive and a guy named Rick who apparently ran collections. They joked about guilt-tripping the newbies into paying up front, bragged about how much profit they'd made off tackle rentals, and one subject line read, "Brooks still refuses to join. Time to pressure?" I opened the email. He thinks that paper his granddad filed means anything. Fine, let him fish. We'll bury him in fines and cut off the path once the new vote passes. By the time he gets legal, we'll have rezoned him out. Rezoned me out, like I was a bug in the software. But it was the Darnell folder that sealed it. It had surveillance photos, not security footage, photos. Me mowing the lawn, sitting on the dock, fixing the outboard motor, zoomed in, cropped. Some were taken at night, one of me and Hazel, kissing. I felt my throat close. Hazel was standing across the room, arms folded tight like she was holding herself in place. "I didn't know about those until I opened it this morning," she said quietly. "I didn't even know he'd been keeping track." Then she added, "He used to brag that you weren't a real threat, just some IT guy with a dead man's deed. That's what he called it, said it like you were already finished." I sat down slowly, the tablet still glowing in my hands. It wasn't just personal, it was premeditated. Clive had been orchestrating this for months, maybe years. He wasn't just mad I had lake access, he was mad I existed on land he wanted with a woman he'd lost, in a house he couldn't control. This was never about a fishing club. This was about wiping me off the map. Hazel stepped forward and said the sentence that changed everything. "You said you're in cybersecurity, right? Because some of the files look off, like they were meant to be hidden?" She wasn't wrong. Some of the PDFs were encrypted. Half the folder structure was nested in a way that looked accidental to the untrained eye, but to me, it was a deliberate attempt to bury dirt. I nodded once, then said quietly, "I'm gonna need a couple days." Because now it wasn't just about defending my dock. It was about taking down a thief, a liar, and a man who mistook silence for weakness. I didn't sleep much that night. Not out of fear. That ship had burned with my boat. No, this was something else. That sharp, buzzing tension behind the eyes, what I used to call breach mode back when I worked incident response for a fintech startup. Same feeling I got when a client swore no one could possibly have accessed their systems. And I already saw 5 Russian IPs doing donuts in their firewall. Clive had left the back door open, and I was already inside. I started with the easy stuff, data recovery. The tablet's internal memory had been wiped in spots, sloppy. Whoever did it clearly knew how to click delete, but didn't understand how digital traces work. Fragments of files still lingered in the unallocated sectors, half-destroyed budgets, old receipts, and a folder labeled HOA Confidential Legacy PDFs. That one I had to reconstruct byte by byte. Took me all of Tuesday, but it was worth it. Inside was a document dated 1991, marked Ashgrove Landing Preliminary Development Plan. It included zoning proposals, neighborhood boundaries, and a very specific notation. Parcel number 317-A, Brooks. Excluded from HOA jurisdiction due to pre-existing private easement and access rights. Non-negotiable. Stamped by the county, signed by 2 witnesses. One of them was my grandfather. So not only had Clive ignored my deed, he'd knowingly tried to overwrite a legally documented exclusion from his own master plan. He knew, and now I had proof. By Wednesday I had the full picture. Financial fraud. Dozens of fabricated vendors funneling dues into Clive's pockets. Harassment and stalking. The folder of photos, the missing keys, the boat, violation of zoning law, attempted revocation of my easement through false HOA votes, abuse of position, using his authority as HOA president to pursue a personal vendetta. Each piece was damning, but together, it was a wrecking ball. I packaged everything into a clean report. No drama, no editorializing, just evidence. 64 pages, well organized, cross-referenced with timestamps and sources. Then I did what I do best. Covered my tracks. Encrypted the report in a cloud drive only accessible by me, Hazel, and a third-party lawyer I found through a nonprofit whistleblower network. Set up a timed autosend if anything happened to me, which Hazel insisted on after finding out she'd been photographed. And just for fun, I threw a redacted copy on a USB drive labeled HOA recipes and left it in my glove box, in case someone decided to go through my truck again. Next, I called in a favor. A buddy of mine from college, Dev, cybersecurity lawyer turned compliance watchdog, owed me one after I helped him clean up a ransomware mess in his consulting firm last year. I gave him a quick rundown. He didn't even hesitate. "Bro, you're sitting on enough to light up a dozen indictments." "Yeah," I said, "but I don't want a scandal. I want a removal. He whistled. In that case, go local, county ethics board first, then the tax fraud hotline, then media. Hit all fronts at once. Don't give him time to pivot. That was the plan. Fast, precise, public. I wasn't going to sneak out a win in court 2 years from now while Clive retired to a golf course. I was going to break his game in front of the people he manipulated. And when the dust settled, the lake would be mine again. Legally, publicly, uncontested. Clive Brenner liked to think he ran Ashgrove Landing like a CEO ran a company. Tight image control, no loose ends. Keep the neighborhood harmonious, and keep the books just confusing enough that no one asked where their dues actually went. He didn't realize he'd been audited. By Friday morning, the plan was in motion. Step 1, local exposure. I sent my report, anonymously of course, to the county ethics board, flagged with a cover letter that walked them through Clive's shell companies, falsified maintenance bills, and zoning manipulation. I backed it with copies of emails, timestamps, and GIS maps overlaid with fake versus actual property lines. I didn't just accuse him of fraud, I showed how he'd done it. Then I blind copied the email to a reporter at the Pine County Ledger, a quiet, stubborn little weekly paper best known for running op-eds about feral cats and zoning complaints. But their senior columnist, Lorraine Pike, was an old-school, no-BS investigative type. I knew she'd bite. By noon, she emailed me back. Can you confirm these documents are authentic? I'm already looking into the fishing club's finances. You've just given me teeth. Step 2. Regulatory firepower. I filed a complaint with the state tax board, listing every suspicious vendor and dollar trail Clive had touched through the HOA's books. The bank account numbers matched Hazel's printouts. The EINs traced to either Nowhere or to Clive's extended family. Then I reported LakeSafe Consulting to the Better Business Bureau, and followed that up with a personal tip to a contact at the state licensing office. Let's just say consultants who don't exist tend to raise eyebrows. Step 3, strategic leak. Saturday afternoon, the neighborhood message board, ashgrovecircle.com, lit up with a thread titled, Fishing Club Dues, Where is the Money Going? Posted by LPIKE at PINELEDGER.com. She didn't use my name, she didn't have to. The post linked to a PDF breakdown of HOA financial inconsistencies along with a redacted version of my findings, pie charts, vendor lists, and a summary of the zoning manipulation going back 5 years. Comments exploded within an hour. Wait, my dues paid for what? I asked about that shoreline beautification project and never got an answer. This can't be real, can it? Who the hell is Darnell Brooks and why isn't he running this place? I just watched. Didn't reply, didn't like a single comment, just waited. Step 4, public confrontation. HOA's annual Community Unity Picnic was that Sunday. The irony burned. Normally, I'd avoid a thing like that, like poison ivy, but not this time. I showed up exactly 15 minutes after it started. Hazel came with me, hair tied up, boots on, quiet support at my side. Clive was already there, holding court under a tent with plastic tables and those little pre-packaged cupcakes they buy from Costco and pretend are homemade. He saw me and froze just for a second, blinked, regained the smile. "Mr. Brooks," he said, just loud enough for the nearby board members to hear. "Here to join the fun, after all?" "No," I said. "I'm here to return something." I held out the original 1991 zoning agreement. Stamped, signed, highlighted. He glanced at it, scoffed, and started to speak. That's when Lorraine Pike walked up behind me with her notebook and phone in one hand, already recording. "Clive," she said, "do you have any comment on the unlicensed vendors and financial discrepancies detailed in this document?" He looked at her, then at me, then at the crowd gathering around us. A few fishing club members stepped closer, reading over each other's shoulders. One guy had a printout, another held up his phone, already live streaming. Clive's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Someone behind him said, "Wait, you signed those LakeSafe checks?" Another voice, "I paid for a damn clubhouse fridge and we got a moldy tackle shed." Then the topper, "Darnell's been saying this for months, we just didn't want to listen." I didn't yell, I didn't grandstand, I didn't need to. He was crumbling in real time and I had front row seats. I left him there, surrounded by neighbors who finally saw the wires in the puppet show. Back at my house, I pulled the last sign off my dock, the one Clive's lackeys had nailed in a week ago. Private HOA, access only. I flipped it over, carved one word into the back with my pocket knife and leaned it against the shed. Returned. It didn't take long. By Monday morning, the HOA board was in full collapse mode. Lorraine Pike's article hit the front page of the Pine County Ledger with the kind of headline that makes coffee shoot out of noses across suburban breakfast tables. Ash Grove HOA president under fire for alleged fraud, harassment, and zoning abuse. There was a photo, Clive mid-blink standing at the picnic with his mouth half open like he was about to sneeze out a lie. Inside the article, copies of falsified vendor invoices, testimony from Hazel, an entire sidebar titled The Brooks Easement, 30 Years of Ignored Law, and a juicy little section quoting neighbors who'd noticed strange spending but didn't want to rock the boat. Turns out, once someone rocks it for you, people get real brave. By Wednesday, the County Ethics Board had opened a formal investigation. The State Tax Fraud Division filed a request for Clive's HOA bank records. And someone, still don't know who, leaked his fishing club's expense spreadsheet to Facebook, complete with highlighted lines like community cooler reimbursement, $1,258.97, and emergency gazebo lighting install, $3,600. Folks were pissed. You could almost hear the lawn chairs slamming shut across Ash Grove Landing. At the emergency HOA meeting that Friday, they had to move the gathering to the high school gym because too many residents RSVP'd. Clive didn't show, but the sheriff's office did. 2 plainclothes deputies walked into the meeting halfway through and handed sealed envelopes to 2 board members, subpoenas. According to Lorraine, one of them looked like he might faint. Another asked if he could step outside. Clive was officially removed as HOA president by unanimous vote before the hour was up. They didn't even wait for him to defend himself. Word spread fast. Neighbors who used to avoid eye contact now waved from their driveways. One woman from 3 streets over brought me a pie. A guy in a camo jacket I'd never met offered to help me rebuild the dock, said he felt like an ass for believing Clive's version of things. Even the fishing club disbanded, what was left of it anyway. Hazel got a quiet apology from the new interim board. They didn't say much, but their silence was loud enough. They knew. They'd let it happen. A few days later, I heard Clive had lawyered up. Some local firm with a commercial on daytime TV. Rumor was the IRS had already frozen 2 of his accounts and were digging into a 3rd under his cousin's name. But I didn't smile. Not exactly. I just went down to the dock, took a long look at the water, and dropped the last remaining HOA letter I'd saved, still sealed, never opened, into the lake. It floated for a second, then sank without a sound. Fitting. I never rebuilt the old boat. Thought about it, even laid out the plans on my workshop table once, but every time I picked up a piece of lumber, something felt off, like I'd be forcing the past back into place just to prove I could. So instead, I built a bench. Simple, sturdy, no varnish, just raw cedar and steel bolts overlooking the water from the exact spot where the boat used to rest. Carved 3 letters into the top rail, RBB Reggie Benjamin Brooks. Granddad would have hated the drama. He wasn't much for headlines or lawsuits, but I think he would have understood the fight, especially once the signs came down. That's right, every last one. No more HOA plaques nailed to trees, no more warnings on the dock, no more members-only trash pinned to the railings. Just shoreline, water, and peace. A month after Clive was removed, the interim board sent me a formal letter. Not a threat this time. An apology. They acknowledged the 1991 easement, affirmed my legal independence from the HOA, and, my favorite part, formally removed parcel 317A from the Ash Grove community map. It felt like peeling a leech off your skin and watching it wriggle away. Hazel and I kept things quiet. No parades, no victory barbecues. We just did our thing. Morning coffee, late walks, lake breeze. Sometimes we'd sit on the bench with our feet in the water, not talking about Clive or fraud or subpoenas, just letting silence mean something again. One evening, as the sun dropped behind the trees, one of the new board members, some guy named Brett, walked down the path and asked if they could post a simple directional sign at the trailhead pointing toward my lot. Just for orientation, he said. We want the new map to be accurate. I looked at Hazel. She shrugged. I told him sure, but I had one condition. Right below the arrow, I asked them to add a plaque that read, "Respect the boundaries and the people who live inside them." He agreed, didn't even argue, so now it's quiet again. No late night calls, no fines, no fake fishing clubs, just the hum of bugs, the creak of the bench, and the occasional ripple on the water. Every Sunday, I still walk down to the dock, sit with a thermos, and cast out a line, not because I need the fish, but because I can. It's not about revenge, not really. It's about the simple freedom to exist without someone constantly trying to shrink your world to fit their comfort zone. They tried to take my lake. I reminded them what earned looks like. And if anyone ever forgets again, well, they can read the damn plaque.